How's it going, people of the interwebs? Twitch.tv/Basiclandshark here. Gonna do a quick little deck tech with a deck that's called Crabvine for Modern. Right now, the deck can be built for around 200 tickets or around 188 US dollars on Magic Online. If you're going through a service like Card Hoarder for rentals, you can rent this version of the deck for about $11 a week, which is not terrible. The deck runs basically almost like a dredge deck in many ways. We want to fill our graveyard for cards like Vengevine and Creeping Chill to deplete the opponent's life total. It's a typical fetch shock mana base. So we have Bloodstained Mire, Verdict Catacombs, and Polluted Delta to go and fetch any one of our 3 Overgrown Tombs, our 2 basic swamps, or our 3 watery graves is how we make our colors. Vengevine, we'll read that one for a second. It's a hasty 4/3 that comes into the battlefield for 2 and 2 green, but we want to return this from the graveyard. So we want to mill ourselves, put this in the graveyard. Whenever you cast your second creature spell this turn, you may return Vengevine from the graveyard to the battlefield. So how are we going to set that up most easily? Starting with Hedron Crab. This is a mill staple, but we want to mill ourselves with our fetch lands. We're heavy on fetch lands in the deck, so we're often able to mill ourselves for 6 or more in a single turn. And we also have Stitcher Supplier, which does a similar thing. When it enters the battlefield or dies, mill 3 cards. So that has the potential to put 6 more cards in the graveyard. Merfolk Secret Keeper. This card is often cast for Venture Deeper, which mills 4 cards. And it also is an 0/4, which can hold down the fort a little bit versus the aggressive decks in the format, your prowess decks and stuff like that. But most importantly, it's a 1-drop. So between Merfolk Secret Keeper, Stitcher Supplier, Gravecrawler, which we can return from the graveyard several times if we control another zombie. We have cheap threats that we can cast to get back Vengevine kind of consistently. Narcomoebas, obviously this card is here to do things like trigger Prized Amalgam, which comes back from the graveyard if another creature enters the battlefield from the graveyard this turn. Silver Smoke Ghoul, this is an interesting one because Silver Smoke Ghoul triggers off of Creeping Chills. When we gain 3 life off Creeping Chill, any Silver Smoke Ghouls in the graveyard will return to the battlefield tapped, also triggering Prized Amalgam, so there's some pretty great synergy there in the deck between these 3 cards. Glimpse the Unthinkable. This is one of the best mill cards in all of Modern. Target player mills 10 cards. This is the most explosive card in the deck by far. It's very unlikely that you whiff when you mill that many cards. Usually you wind up with at least 1 Prized Amalgam, at least 1 Vengevine, sometimes 1 or more Creeping Chills in the graveyard, so good stuff there. And Life from the Limb, this is the only one of in the deck. This is mostly here to make sure that we do make it to our 4th land drop. And then sometimes you do mill over your fetchable sources. So Life from the Loam makes it so that we always have a land in hand and makes it easier to hard cast Vengevines in the matchups where that's a thing. So this deck is kind of weak to graveyard hate a lot of times, but the plan B is just to hard cast your threats. And we do have a fairly decent curve of Gravecrawler into something like a Narcomoeba or a Prized Amalgam into a Vengevine. I've gotten a few games off my opponent that way through Graveyard Hate. So you're not completely boned if your opponent plays a Graveyard Hate spell. But that's what we focus on for our sideboard cards. So moving on to the sideboard, couple removal spells in the form of Fatal Push, and also Abrupt Decay can be a removal spell in a pinch. Drown on the Lock. This is a nice versatile counter spell for the deck, but it also can function as removal, so I think it's pretty powerful. If you have the budget for it, some versions of this deck run Force of Negation, but that card is a little pricey, so I like to run a budget option here, at least for the purpose of this video. And I don't think it's that much worse. Obviously, you do have to tap mana for Drown in the Loch, but it can also kill a creature, so I think it's just a little bit more versatile than something like a Force of Negation would be in that spot. We are running 2 copies of Mystic Repeal. This is pretty much a hedge versus the Heliod combo matchup, but it can also work to put something like a opposing Leyline of the Void or an opposing Rest in Peace on the bottom of the opponent's library. Good stuff there. Pithing Needle, this is splash hate versus Planeswalkers, as well as it can turn off something like Nile Spellbomb or even a Relic of Progenitus, cards that would otherwise kind of wreck this deck. Damping Sphere, this is for combo decks like Storm, as well as big mana like Amulet Titan and Tron decks. Kind of hates on those 3 decks all at once. Nice and versatile. Speaking of versatility, Golgari Charm. All creatures get -1/-1 until end of turn. That can be a good way to sweep the board if your opponent is running tokens of any sort, but it also deals with Leyline of the Void, and it also deals with Rest in Peace, which would otherwise be a huge problem for this deck. Also, regenerate each creature you control. Sort of allows you to attack with immunity. Doesn't matter what kind of damage is done, you get to regenerate your creatures and still have a board left over. Sometimes that's all you need is one more turn in Modern, and this card will get you there. Abrupt Decay works against a lot of the graveyard hate spells in the format, but it also is important versus things like Chalice of the Void and 3 mana Teferi Time Reveler. There's just a lot of cards that this hits, and that's very important for the deck. You get to take out your graveyard hate spells and key permanents like Ensnaring Bridge with Abrupt Decay. The Drown of the Loch we talked about, very versatile, works as counters and it works as a counter spell and works as a removal spell for the deck. So I think it's going to be pretty good in the slot where I see Force of Negation and also Force of Vigor ran in this deck. I don't really understand why decks are running Force of Vigor in a build like this. We don't really have that many green cards to pitch to it, so I'm opting not to run that card in this build. Stain the Mind. Let's talk about this one for a second. So extraction effects like Surgical Extraction can be really good in Modern, and this one, because we put so many creatures on the battlefield so fast, the Convoke is essentially it's essentially just a Surgical Extraction effect with upside, because we can cast it on the cheap, choose a non-land card name, and search target player's graveyard, hand, and library for any number of cards with that name, exile them. It doesn't have to be in the graveyard like Surgical Extraction or whatever the other effect is. I can't remember the name of now, but there's other cards that do this, but this one you don't have to have the card in the graveyard, which is nice. And you can name things like Primeval Titan or Amulet of Vigor, or I don't know, decks that lean on one card in particular, like a Through the Breach deck. You know, you can name the card that actually helps them win the game and basically get rid of it for good. And that can work against a lot of combo decks in the format as well. So Stain the Mind, very versatile, does what you need to do a lot of the format, so it's good to have access to that kind of stuff. That's sort of like the overview of the deck. Not going to get into any games here, but look out for a video with a league with this particular version of Crabvine coming down the pipeline. So if you haven't already done so, go ahead and get subscribed to the channel. Put a like on the video if you like the content, you want to see more stuff like this. Again, it's Chuck, aka Basiclandshark, from over on twitch.tv. If you're interested in a live stream, head over there and give me a follow on Twitch, and they'll notify you the next time that I'm live streaming. So until the next video, everyone have a great day, great night, wherever you're at in the world. This is going to be Basiclandshark signing off. Take care.